If I told you there is an animal on this planet that breathes through its legs, digests food using tubes that run all the way down to its feet, and pumps its blood not with its heart, but with its stomach, would you believe me? What if I also told you the males of this species are the ones who get pregnant? Not metaphorically. They physically carry the eggs, glued to their own bodies for months, while barely eating, slowly starving, just so their babies survive. And what if I told you this creature has been doing all of this, completely unbothered, for over 400 million years, before trees existed, before sharks existed, before there were bones on this planet at all? This isn't science fiction. It's crawling around on the ocean floor right now, possibly within a few hundred feet of a beach near you. It's called a sea spider. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why marine biologists call it one of the strangest functional body plans in the entire animal kingdom. Let's get into it. Here's the first thing you need to unlearn. Sea spiders are not spiders. The name is right there. It's practically begging you to assume it's just a spider that learned to swim. Real spiders belong to a group called Arachnida. Sea spiders belong to their own completely separate class called Pycnogonida. And while they are distant cousins of spiders, scorpions, and horseshoe crabs, they split off from that family tree so long ago and evolved so differently that calling them just spiders is a bit like calling a bat just a bird because they both fly. Scientists have actually spent over a century arguing about where exactly sea spiders even belong on the tree of life. For a long time, some researchers thought they might represent one of the earliest branches to split off from all other arthropods, a kind of living fossil that peeled away from the main evolutionary trunk before insects, crustaceans, or arachnids even existed as separate groups. More recent genetic evidence has pulled them back into the same broad group as spiders and scorpions, called the chelicerates. But even now, exactly how deep that branch goes is still being debated in scientific journals, as recently as the past couple of years. This is a creature that has confused biologists since the 1800s. And honestly, it's still confusing them today. And once you understand the name Pycnogonida, the confusion starts to make a bit more sense. It comes from Greek, and it roughly translates to densi knees. Because when 18th and 19th century naturalists looked at these things, all they could really register was legs. Long, thin, multi-jointed legs radiating out in every direction from what looks like almost nothing in the middle. There's actually a second, less common name for them too, pantapod, which literally means all feet, which once you see ones feels almost insultingly accurate. Picture a creature that is essentially just legs wearing a body as an accessory. In most species, the central body, called the trunk, is so small and so thin that it looks like it was an afterthought. Some species have bodies barely a couple of millimeters long, with legs stretching out several times that length in every direction. It's not an exaggeration to say that in some sea spiders, if you scooped out everything inside that tiny central trunk, there would barely be anything left to define as the animal. The legs aren't just for walking. In sea spiders, the legs basically are the animal. Now here's where it gets genuinely disturbing, in the best possible way. In pretty much every animal you've ever thought about, the digestive system is a private, contained thing. It lives inside your torso, your gut does its business, and that's where the story ends. In sea spiders, the digestive tract doesn't stay politely tucked away in the trunk. It branches. It extends down through the body and pushes outward into every single leg, running almost all the way to the very tips. Scientists call these branches gut diverticula, and in most species, they form simple tube-like extensions running down each leg. But in some species, like a common shallow-water sea spider called Pycnogonum littorale, researchers have found that these gut branches don't just run in a straight line and split again, forming an intricate multi-branched network inside the legs, almost like a root system growing through a tree branch. Why would evolution do this? Because the sea spider's central body is so absurdly small that there simply isn't enough room inside it to hold a normal digestive system. So evolution did something almost unthinkable. It said, fine, if there's no room in the middle, we'll put the stomach in the legs instead. Which brings us to the discovery that genuinely stunned marine biologists. And it didn't happen in some dusty museum archive. It happened in Antarctica, under the ice, less than a decade ago. A researcher named Arthur Woods, an evolutionary physiologist from the University of Montana, was studying sea spiders in Antarctica, and he noticed something that didn't add up. Sea spiders do have a heart. It's real, it beats, it's located in that tiny central trunk. But when Woods and his team actually watched it working under a microscope, the heart was beating weakly, almost pathetically weakly. It seemed capable of pushing blood around inside the trunk itself, but it had no real power to force that blood all the way out into legs that, in some giant Antarctic species, can stretch to well over a foot in length. So how was the blood, and more importantly the oxygen inside that blood, actually getting all the way out to the tips of those legs? The answer, it turned out, was hiding in plain sight. It was the gut. Remember those digestive tubes running down every leg? Woods discovered that as those tubes contract and squeeze in slow, deliberate waves to push digested food along, exactly the way your own intestines do, something remarkable happens on the outside of those gut tubes. That squeezing motion physically shoves the surrounding blood, which sea spiders don't call blood. By the way, it's technically called hemolymph, out and along the length of the leg too. As one section of gut bulges and pushes, it displaces the fluid around it, and that fluid movement drags freshly oxygenated hemolymph along with it, out toward the leg tips and back again. In other words, the sea spider's stomach doubles as its heart. To quote one scientist involved in related research, sea spiders essentially use their legs like gills, absorbing oxygen through their thin leg walls by simple diffusion from the surrounding seawater, and then using the rhythmic squeezing of their own gut to physically shove that freshly absorbed oxygen back toward the rest of the body. When Woods and his team artificially lowered the oxygen levels in the water around the spiders, the gut contractions sped up immediately, almost like the animal was panting. It's the exact same physiological panic response you'd feel gasping for air at high altitude, except the sea spider isn't breathing faster, it's digesting faster. This is, as far as researchers currently know, the only confirmed case in the entire animal kingdom of a digestive system functioning as a full-blown replacement circulatory pump. Not a backup system, not a minor assist. The primary mechanism, your stomach, does not pump your blood. A sea spider's does. And once you know that, the whole animal starts to look less like a curiosity and more like a completely alien solution to a problem every animal on Earth has to solve. How do you get oxygen from the outside world to the inside of your cells fast enough to stay alive? Let's talk about reproduction. Because if the gutter's heart thing wasn't strange enough for you, this next part might be the single most quietly radical thing about sea spiders. In the vast majority of the animal kingdom, when eggs need protecting, it's typically the female investing the heavy resources, if not directly carrying the offspring. Sea spiders flip that dynamic almost entirely. In most sea spider species, males possess a specialized pair of legs called ovigas, located right between their pincer-like front appendages and their first walking legs. Females can sometimes have reduced or entirely absent versions of these limbs, but in males, the ovigas are fully developed, and their primary job is childcare. After mating, the female releases her eggs, and the male gathers them up, fertilizes them, and then glues the entire clutch, sometimes thousands of eggs at once, directly onto his own oviger legs, forming a dense, round mass that he then carries around for weeks or even months, everywhere he goes. He guards them. He aerates them by rhythmically moving those legs through the water. In some cases, he's been observed grooming them to keep parasites and algae off the eggs. All of this happens while the male's mobility is reduced and his ability to hunt is compromised, because two of his limbs are now permanently occupied holding a ball of his own children. This is genuinely one of the most extreme documented cases of exclusive male parental care in the entire animal kingdom, arguably rivaling seahorses, except seahorses carry their young internally in a pouch. Male sea spiders carry theirs externally, exposed, glued to their own exoskeleton, vulnerable to the same currents, predators, and parasites that threaten everything else in the ocean. But here's where the story gets even better, because it turns out even this reliable rule of the sea spider world has an exception, and scientists only discovered it a couple of years ago, and it involves the giants of the family. In Antarctica, there's a species called Colossendias megalonyx, and it's a certified giant among sea spiders. While most sea spider species could comfortably sit on your fingernail, this one can have a leg span exceeding a foot across, roughly the size of a dinner plate. It's one of the most famous examples of something called polar gigantism, a bizarre phenomenon where certain cold water species grow dramatically larger than their close relatives living in warmer oceans. Scientists have been describing this giant sea spider in scientific literature for over 140 years, and for 140 years, nobody had ever actually witnessed how it reproduced. That changed in October of 2021, when a research team from the University of Hawaii, led by Professor Amy Moran, went diving under the Antarctic ice specifically to try to catch these giants in the act. And they got remarkably lucky. They found groups of the giant spiders that appeared to be mating, collected them, and brought them into tanks to observe. What they saw broke the pattern completely. Unlike almost every other known sea spider species, the giant Antarctic sea spider does not carry its eggs around on oviger legs at all. One parent, most likely the male, spends roughly 2 full days meticulously attaching the eggs directly onto the rocky sea floor, gluing them down in place, and then simply leaving them there to develop for months before they eventually hatch into tiny larvae. Published their findings in the scientific journal Ecology in February 2024. And one of the researchers admitted something almost funny about how they'd missed it for so long. The eggs are so small and so quickly covered in microscopic algae that they become almost perfectly camouflaged against the sea floor within just a few weeks, which is likely exactly why over a century of scientists studying these animals in Antarctica had simply never spotted a clutch, even when it was sitting right in front of them the entire time. Now let's talk about why these giants exist in the first place. Because polar gigantism is one of those phrases that sounds like a throwaway science fact, but it's actually connected to a genuine, ongoing scientific mystery. The most famous explanation, sometimes called the oxygen hypothesis, goes something like this. Cold water can physically hold more dissolved oxygen than warm water. Combine that with the fact that cold-blooded animals in freezing environments tend to have naturally slower metabolisms, and you get a scenario where these animals have access to more oxygen than they actually need to survive at a small size, which theoretically frees them up to evolve larger bodies without suffocating from the inside out, since larger bodies generally struggle more to get enough oxygen to every cell relative to their size. It's an elegant theory. There's just one problem. When scientists actually went out and tested it directly on sea spiders, it didn't hold up cleanly. Researchers studying Antarctic pycnogonids specifically predicted that if the oxygen hypothesis were true, the larger sea spider species should perform disproportionately worse than smaller species when oxygen levels in the water were experimentally lowered, since bigger bodies should theoretically struggle more without abundant oxygen. But that's not what they found. Across 12 different species spanning 3 orders of magnitude in body size, there was no meaningful difference in how badly large versus small sea spiders were affected by low oxygen. The big ones weren't more fragile than the small ones, which means, according to this particular research, oxygen alone doesn't fully explain why these things get so enormous down there. So what does? Honestly, nobody has a complete answer yet. It might be food availability. It might be reduced competition in these extreme environments. It might be some combination of developmental and growth responses to cold temperatures that we don't fully understand. This is a live, ongoing area of research, and sea spiders happen to be one of the best natural test subjects scientists have for studying it, specifically because their circulatory system is so unusual and so poorly protected by normal oxygen delivery structures that any effect of oxygen availability on body size should, in theory, show up loud and clear in them. if it exists at all. Let's zoom out for a second, because I want you to appreciate just how ancient this body plan actually is. Sea spiders aren't some modern evolutionary experiment. Fossils of ancient pycnogonids have been found in rock formations dating back to the Devonian period, roughly 400 million years ago, in a famous fossil site in Germany called the Hunsrück Slate. These fossils are exceptional because of how they were preserved, through a process involving pyrite mineralization that essentially turned soft ancient bodies into detailed metallic casts, capturing anatomical details you'd never expect to survive that long. And remarkably, these 400-million-year-old sea spiders already show recognizably similar features to their descendants today, distinctive body plans that researchers are still working to fully map onto the modern family tree, in studies published as recently as the last couple of years. 400 million years ago, there were no dinosaurs, there were no reptiles, insects had barely started colonizing land, and sea spiders, or something remarkably close to them, were already crawling around the ocean floor, running their guts through their legs and using them to breathe. Today, that ancient body plan is more successful and more widespread than most people realize. There are currently at least 1,400 recognized species of sea spider, described across roughly 80 genera, and that count keeps climbing as researchers continue formally describing new species discovered on expeditions, including some published within just the past year. They live in every single ocean on Earth, from shallow tide pools you could wade into on an afternoon beach walk, all the way down to depths of around 7,000 meters, deep enough to sit well within what's considered the abyssal zone of the ocean. Roughly 20% of all known sea spider species live specifically around Antarctica, making it one of the great, quietly overlooked hotspots of pycnogonid diversity on the planet. Most of them are small enough that you'd need a magnifying glass to properly appreciate them, some species measuring under a millimeter across as adults. But the deep sea and polar giants, the colossendae of the world, can reach leg spans of up to 70 centimeters, which is nearly 2.5 feet across. Try to picture that for a second. An animal built on essentially the same fundamental body plan as something that could comfortably perch on your fingertip, scaled up to something you could barely wrap both arms around. And how do these things actually eat, given that they don't have jaws in any conventional sense? Most sea spiders feed using a long tube-like structure called a proboscis, which extends forward from the front of the body. Depending on the species, they use this proboscis to pierce or attach to soft-bodied invertebrates like sea anemones, hydroids, sponges and bryozoans, and then essentially suck out the fluids and tissue, a bit like using a straw on a very unwilling smoothie. Some species have been documented behaving more like scavengers or even occasional grazers, but the classic image of a sea spider feeding is one clamped onto the side of a soft coral or anemone, patiently drawing out its insides through that long while barely appearing to move at all. Here's one more detail that tends to blow people's minds once they hear it, and it circles back to that whole legs are basically the animal theme. Because so much of a sea spider's essential biology, digestion, respiration, and in males, reproduction, is happening out in the legs rather than tucked safely in the trunk, you'd think losing a leg would be catastrophic, and for many animals, it absolutely would be. But sea spiders, like a number of other arthropods, are capable of regenerating lost limbs, rebuilding not just the outer leg structure, but the internal gut branches and nerve pathways running through it as well, over the course of subsequent molts. It's a slow process, and it's not unlimited, but it means that an organ system essential to actually staying alive is, remarkably, something this animal can partially rebuild from scratch if it's damaged. So let's bring this all together, because when you actually stack up everything we've covered, the picture that emerges is genuinely one of the strangest working body plans in the animal kingdom. This is a creature with a body so small it can't fit its own organs inside it, so evolution rerouted its digestive system into its legs instead. A creature whose heart is functionally a backup singer, while its stomach does the actual work of keeping oxygen moving through its body, a mechanism that, as of current research, remains unique among all known animals. A creature where, in most species, the fathers are the primary caregivers, gluing thousands of eggs to their own bodies and carrying them for months, except in certain Antarctic giants, who we only found out within the last few years, do something else entirely. A lineage that has been quietly running this exact biological blueprint for over 400 million years, surviving mass extinctions that wiped out the vast majority of life on Earth without ever needing to fundamentally rebuild its own body plan from scratch. And it's still out there right now, in tide pools, in coral reefs, in the crushing dark of the deep sea. Under the Antarctic ice at this exact moment, somewhere, a male sea spider is very likely slowly starving himself, while a ball of his own children sits glued to his legs, and he is not going anywhere until they're ready to survive, on their own. Nothing about that is normal. And that's exactly why it's worth knowing about. If this kind of deep dive into the genuinely strange corners of the animal kingdom is your thing, make sure you're subscribed, because this is far from the last creature we're going to dissect. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.